The Winchester rifle cracked across the ravine, and Donald Gomez dropped like a stone. Emma Mitchell worked the lever with practiced precision, brass cartridge spinning through mountain air as she tracked her next target through the scope. 50 yards below, Frank Smith dove behind a boulder, shouting orders to men who could no longer hear him over the ringing in their ears. She had turned the entire ravine into a killing field. Every rock, every tree, every shadow served her purpose now. The same terrain where these outlaws had burned her general store 3 days ago had become their tomb. The morning mist clung to pine branches as Emma shifted position, moving like smoke through cover she had mapped in her mind 20 years ago, before she became the widow who ran Clearwater Trading Post, before she buried her husband and her past together in the same grave. George Allen broke from cover, sprinting toward the ravine mouth. Emma led him by 2 feet, squeezed the trigger, and watched him tumble into the creek that ran red with mountain runoff and something darker. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. You will want to remember this one. Frank Jimenez, the gang leader who had laughed when she warned them, now pressed himself against granite and called for retreat. Too late. She had given them their chance. They chose to burn her life instead of walking away. The last shot echoed off canyon walls like thunder. 3 days earlier, Emma Mitchell had been hanging wash behind her store when she heard the horses coming. 8 riders moving fast down the mountain trail, dust rising behind them like a signal fire. She knew trouble when she saw it, had learned to read danger in the set of shoulders and the way men carry their guns. She finished pinning Thomas Ramirez's work shirts to the line, took her time folding the empty basket. No sense rushing toward whatever they wanted. Trouble always found you quick enough. The bell above her door chimed as boots hit the wooden porch. Heavy steps, spurs jangling, the sound of men who expected the world to move aside. Emma wiped her hands on her apron and walked through the back room into her store. 8 men filled the space between her shelves. Too many for the narrow aisles, too many for anything honest. The leader stood near her counter, a big man with silver threading his black beard and eyes like winter ice. Frank Jimenez, if the wanted posters were accurate. Worth $500 dead or alive, according to the territorial marshal. Behind him stood his lieutenant, Donald Gomez, lean and nervous with quick hands that stayed near his guns. The others spread through her store like they owned it, touching merchandise, studying exits, marking territory. "You Emma Mitchell?" Jimenez asked, though it was not really a question. "I am," she said. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" The word gentleman carried just enough weight to let them know she was not impressed. Jimenez smiled, but it never reached those winter eyes. "Heard you got yourself a nice operation here. Trading post, general store, bit of everything a man might need in rough country." Emma kept her hands visible, relaxed at her sides. Old habits died hard. "I do my best to serve the community. That is what we want to talk about." Community service. You see, we have been working these mountains for some time now, providing protection services to folks who might need them. She had heard about their protection. 3 ranches burned, 2 families run off their claims, a mining camp that paid tribute or found their equipment destroyed. Frank Jimenez and his boys were not in the protection business. They were in the terror business. "I appreciate the offer, but I managed just fine on my own." George Allen, a thick man with scarred knuckles, laughed from beside the pickle barrel. "Lady, you do not understand. This is not an offer. This is how things work now." Emma met his gaze without blinking. "I understand perfectly." And my answer remains the same. Jimenez stepped closer to the counter. The wood between them seemed thin as paper. "Mrs. Mitchell, you are a widow woman trying to run a business in dangerous territory. Accidents happen, fires start, sometimes folks just disappear." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt something cold settle in her chest, familiar as an old coat. She had not felt that coldness in 5 years, not since she buried her badge with her husband. "I appreciate your concern for my safety," she said quietly, "but I suggest you move along before this gets complicated." The silence stretched between them. Frank Smith, youngest of the gang, shifted his weight near the door. Thomas Ramirez fingered a can of peaches like he was thinking about taking it. Dorothy Diaz would have laughed at these men, Emma thought. Her old partner had always said the dangerous ones were the quiet ones, not the ones who made speeches. "Complicated," Jimenez repeated, tasting the word. "Lady, you got no idea what complicated looks like. We will be back tomorrow for our first payment. $50 a month, cash money. You can afford it, or you can afford to start over somewhere else. He turned toward the door, his men falling in behind him like wolves following the pack leader. At the threshold, he paused. Nice store, Mrs. Mitchell. Be a real shame if something happened to it. They rode out the same way they came, fast and loud, leaving dust and the smell of horse sweat and unwashed men. Emma stood behind her counter until the sound of hooves faded, then walked to the window and watched them disappear down the mountain trail. She knew their type, had hunted their type for 15 years before she hung up her guns and married a good man who asked no questions about the scars on her hands or why she sometimes woke up reaching for weapons that were not there. James Mitchell had given her 5 years of peace, 5 years of selling flour and coffee and listening to mountain gossip, 5 years of being just Emma, the widow who ran Clearwater Trading Post and minded her own business. Those years were over now. That evening, Emma closed her store early and walked the quarter-mile to the small cemetery where James rested under a simple wooden cross. The inscription read, James Mitchell, beloved husband, followed by dates that marked too short a life. She knelt beside the grave and spoke quietly to the man who could not answer. They want to burn what we built together. Want to take what you left me. I gave them their warning. James, you know I always give them one chance to walk away. The wind moved through pine branches overhead, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter arrived early in these mountains, and it stayed late. By morning, the first flakes would be falling. I know what you would say, that I promised to leave that life behind, that I swore I was done with killing. But they made the choice when they threatened our store, our home. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Tomorrow she would give Frank Jimenez and his boys one more chance to ride away. After that, she would stop being the widow who sold coffee and sugar. She would remember who she used to be. Before James, before the store, before she learned to smile at customers and make change for penny candy, Emma Mitchell had been Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks. For 15 years, she had tracked killers through territory where law was whatever you could enforce with a gun and a badge. She had been good at it. Too good. Maybe. Good enough that her name became legend in certain circles. Good enough that she started seeing the faces of dead men in her dreams. Good enough that when James asked her to marry him and leave it all behind, she said yes, without hesitation. But legends did not die just because you buried your badge. They waited in the ground like seeds, ready to grow again when the soil was right. The next morning brought snow as promised, fat flakes drifting between the pines like ash from a distant fire. Emma opened her store at dawn, same as always. She arranged merchandise, swept the floors, counted yesterday's receipts. Everything normal except for the Colt revolver tucked into her apron pocket and the Winchester rifle standing behind the counter where the broom usually lived. Frank Jimenez arrived at noon with 4 of his men. Donald Gomez and George Allen flanked him, while Frank Smith and Thomas Ramirez waited outside with the horses. They stamped snow from their boots and looked around like they owned the place. Mrs. Mitchell, Jimenez said, touching his hat brim in mock politeness. Beautiful morning for business. Emma continued stocking shelves, her back to them. It is indeed. What can I help you with today? You know why we are here. $50, like we discussed. She turned to face them, hands empty and visible. I told you yesterday, I do not need your protection. George Allen stepped forward, hand resting on his gun butt. Lady, I think you misunderstood the nature of our arrangement. Emma studied him with eyes that had seen 100 men like him. Big, confident, used to getting his way through intimidation. The type who hit women and called it discipline. The type who burned homesteads and called it business. I understood perfectly, she said. You want $50 a month to not burn down my store. That is called extortion, and it is a federal crime. Jimenez laughed. Federal crime, you hear that, boys. Lady thinks the federals care what happens up here in the mountains. They might surprise you, Emma said quietly. Something in her tone made Donald Gomez shift his weight. He was the smart one, she realized. The one who might recognize danger when it looked back at him. Mrs. Mitchell, Jimenez said, patience wearing thin, you got 2 choices. Pay us or find out what happens to folks who do not pay us. Emma walked slowly toward the counter, movements casual and unthreatening. Behind the register, her fingers found the familiar weight of the Winchester. Actually, Mr. Jimenez, I think you are the one with choices to make. You can walk out that door right now and never come back. Or you can find out why smart men do not threaten Emma Brooks. The name hit the room like a physical blow. George Allen actually took a step backward. Frank Smith, visible through the window, went pale as fresh snow. Donald Gomez whispered something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Emma Brooks, Jimenez repeated slowly. The Emma Brooks, the one they called the ghost of Gila Bend. That was a long time ago, Emma said. But some skills you never forget. The silence stretched like a held breath. Outside, snow continued falling, muffling the world in white silence. Inside the store, 5 people stood frozen in a moment that would define everything that came after. Jimenez recovered first, though sweat beaded his forehead despite the cold. That was 15 years ago. You've been selling coffee and sugar ever since, playing at being a shopkeeper. Emma kept her hands steady on the counter. The Winchester was 3 inches from her right hand. The Colt in her apron pocket felt familiar as breathing. I was never playing, Mr. Jimenez. I was trying to be someone else, someone better. But you made that impossible when you threatened my home. George Allen found his voice. Boss, maybe we should think about this. Emma Brooks killed 27 men in her career. All legal, all justified, all necessary, Emma added quietly. Jimenez looked around the store, seeing it differently now. Not a widow's desperate attempt to survive, but a careful arrangement of sightlines and defensive positions. The counter provided cover. The back room offered escape routes. The high shelves created natural choke points. You are bluffing, he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Emma Brooks is dead, has been for years. Emma smiled for the first time since they entered her store. It was not a pleasant expression. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Donald Gomez tugged at his boss's sleeve. Frank, we should go. This is not worth it. Jimenez shook him off. No, I do not care who she used to be. She is one woman against 8 of us. One woman hiding behind old stories. Emma sighed. That was your warning, Mr. Jimenez. Next one will not miss. She moved like lightning, the Winchester coming up smooth and natural as sunrise. The rifle cracked once, and the hat flew off Frank Smith's head outside. Through the window, they could see him dive behind a water trough, hat spinning in the snow with a neat hole through the crown. The shot echoed off the mountains for 3 full seconds. When the sound died, Emma had the rifle trained on Jimenez's chest. Her hands were steady as stone. That was a warning shot, she said conversationally. I do not miss when I mean to hit. George Allen went for his gun. The Winchester swung toward him, and he froze with his hand on the grip, knowing he would die if he drew. Smart man, Emma said. Now all of you are going to walk out of my store. You are going to ride down this mountain and never come back. Because if I see you again, I stop giving warnings. Jimenez backed toward the door, hands raised but eyes burning with rage. This is not over, Brooks. Yes, Emma said quietly. It is. They backed out of the store like men leaving a church, respectful and afraid. Through the window, Emma watched them mount up and ride hard down the mountain trail. Frank Smith retrieved his hat and stared at the bullet hole before jamming it back on his head. Emma stood behind her counter until they disappeared, then walked to the door and turned the sign to closed. She had preparations to make. In the back room, behind sacks of flour and cases of canned goods, Emma pried up a loose floorboard. Underneath lay a wooden box wrapped in oiled cloth. She lifted it carefully, like handling a sleeping rattlesnake. Inside the box were the tools of her old trade. Her federal marshal badge, tarnished but still legal. A second Colt revolver twinned to the one in her apron. A leather gun belt worn smooth by 15 years of use. And at the bottom, wrapped in black silk, a knife with a bone handle and her initials carved into the blade. Dorothy Diaz had given her that knife on the day they became partners. For when bullets are not enough, Dorothy had said. For when you need to be quiet. Emma strapped on the gun belt, feeling the familiar weight settle around her hips. The second Colt slid into its holster like it had never left. She pinned the badge inside her coat over her heart. In the mirror beside her washstand, a stranger looked back. Not the widow who sold penny candy and listened to gossip. Not the woman who had buried her guns with her husband. This was Emma Brooks, Deputy U.S. Marshal. The woman who had tracked the Gila Bend killers through 100 miles of desert. The woman who had brought in the Tucson gang alive when everyone said it could not be done. The woman Frank Jimenez should have left alone. She spent the afternoon preparing. The store became a fortress, shelves repositioned to create firing lanes and defensive positions. Extra ammunition went into strategic locations. Escape routes were cleared and tested. As evening approached, Emma climbed to the ridge behind her store and studied the terrain with professional eyes. The ravine where the creek ran offered perfect cover for an approach. The pine grove on the eastern slope provided concealment. The rocky outcropping to the south commanded the entire valley. If she were planning an attack, she would come from 3 directions at once, pin down the target and overwhelm with superior numbers. It was good tactics against an ordinary opponent. But Emma Brooks had never been ordinary. That night, she did not sleep in her bed above the store. Instead, she made camp in the rocks overlooking the ravine, wrapped in a bedroll that had seen 1,000 nights under hostile stars. The Winchester lay beside her, loaded and ready. Snow fell steadily, covering tracks and muffling sound. Perfect weather for an ambush. Perfect weather for ghosts. At dawn, they came. 8 riders approached through the falling snow, moving in the precise formation Emma had predicted. Frank Jimenez led the main group up the valley floor, while Donald Gomez and 2 others circled through the pine grove. George Allen took the remaining men along the ridge to the south. They thought they were hunting a frightened widow. Instead, they were walking into the crosshairs of the most dangerous woman in the territory. Emma let them get close. Let them think they had surprise. From her position in the rocks, she could see all 3 groups converging on her store. In 5 minutes, they would be in position to attack. She gave them 4. The first shot took Donald Gomez clean through the chest as he emerged from the pines. He dropped without a sound, rifle spinning from dead fingers into the snow. His companions dove for cover, shouting warnings that echoed off the canyon walls. Emma was already moving, flowing through the rocks like water, taking a new position before return fire could find her. The Winchester cracked again, and Frank Smith pitched backward off his horse, clutching a shattered shoulder. George Allen led his men in a charge up the slope, thinking to overwhelm her with numbers. Emma waited until they were committed, then rose from behind a boulder and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 men fell. The third, Thomas Ramirez, threw down his rifle and ran. Smart man. The remaining outlaws took cover in the ravine, exactly where Emma wanted them. She had spent 15 years learning to read terrain like scripture, and this particular verse was written in her favor. The ravine was a trap. Steep walls, limited exits, nowhere to run when the shooting started. Frank Jimenez was discovering that superior numbers meant nothing if you could not bring them to bear. Emma worked her way along the rim, firing down into their positions. Each shot was carefully placed, professionally executed. She was not spraying lead and hoping for luck. She was a surgeon with a rifle, cutting them apart one precise shot at a time. Donald Gomez tried to climb the eastern wall. Emma put a bullet through his leg and watched him slide back down into the creek. George Allen attempted to rally his remaining men for another charge. The Winchester spoke twice, and suddenly Allen was giving orders to corpses. By noon, only Frank Jimenez remained alive in the ravine. The others lay scattered in the snow like broken dolls, their blood painting abstract patterns on white canvas. Emma called down to him from the rim. "It is over, Jimenez. Come out with your hands up." His voice echoed off stone walls, hollow and defeated. Emma Brooks should have known better than to tangle with a legend. "You should have taken my warning," she replied. "Should have walked away when I gave you the chance," Jimenez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what is funny? We came here thinking we were so smart, thinking we could intimidate one scared widow." Emma kept the rifle trained on his position. "You thought wrong. Yeah, we surely did." The silence stretched between them. Snow continued falling, already beginning to cover the bodies of his men. By evening, the ravine would be white and clean again, hiding the evidence of their mistake. "I am coming out," Jimenez called. "Do not shoot." He emerged from behind the boulder where he had taken shelter, hands raised, gun belt lying in the snow behind him. Blood ran from a graze along his scalp where one of Emma's shots had come close. Emma climbed down from the rim, rifle never wavering from his chest. When she reached the ravine floor, she stopped 10 feet away. "You know," he said, studying her face, "I heard stories about Emma Brooks for years. Thought they were just tales to scare greenhorns. But looking at you now, I believe every damn word. Emma kept the Winchester steady. The stories were true. All of them. What happens now? You turn me into the territorial marshal. Collect the bounty. Emma considered this. The bounty on Frank Jimenez was $500, enough to keep her store running for a year. But money had never been why she hunted men like him. What happens now, she said, is you disappear. You ride out of this territory and you never come back. You never mention my name or this place to anyone. You forget Emma Brooks exists. Jimenez stared at her. You are letting me go. I am giving you the same chance I gave you yesterday, the same chance you should have taken then. He shook his head in amazement. Lady, you are something else. Most folks would put a bullet in me and call it justice. Most folks never learn the difference between justice and revenge, Emma replied. I did. She backed away, keeping the rifle trained on him until he reached his horse. Jimenez mounted slowly, favoring his wounded scalp. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, touching his hat brim, it has been an education. Emma watched him ride away, disappearing into the falling snow, like a ghost returning to whatever hell had spawned him. She stood alone in the ravine among the bodies of his men, feeling the weight of years settling on her shoulders. The killing was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. That evening, Emma dragged the bodies to a natural cave in the ravine wall. Come spring, when the snow melted, she would bury them properly. Even outlaws deserved that much dignity. But for now, the cave would keep them safe from wolves and weather. She cleaned her rifle carefully, the way Dorothy Diaz had taught her 20 years ago. Every gun was a tool, and tools deserve respect, especially tools that saved your life. As darkness fell, Emma made her way back to the store. The building looked different now, marked by bullet holes in the memory of violence. But it was still her home, still the place James had given her when he offered his name and his heart. Inside, she lit the oil lamps and surveyed the damage. Shelves knocked askew, merchandise scattered, windows cracked by stray shots. It would take time to repair, but she had time now. Frank Jimenez would spread the word that Emma Brooks was alive and dangerous. Other predators would find easier prey. She was hanging up her gun belt when hoofbeats approached outside. Emma tensed, hand moving toward the Colt, but the rider called out before reaching the door. Emma, it is Virginia Kelly. Emma relaxed. Virginia ran the telegraph office in Cedar Falls, 20 miles down the mountain. She was also the closest thing to law enforcement the territory had, since the nearest federal marshal was 3 days right away. Emma opened the door to find Virginia dismounting from a lathered horse. Snow covered her coat and hat, and her face was grim with purpose. I got word about the shooting, Virginia said without preamble. Thought I better ride up and check on you. Emma stepped aside to let her in. Word travels fast. Virginia stomped snow from her boots and looked around the damaged store. Thomas Ramirez rode into Cedar Falls an hour ago. Said Frank Jimenez and his boys tried to rob Emma Mitchell's store. Said Emma Mitchell turned out to be Emma Brooks. Emma poured coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove. What else did he say? That you killed 7 men in about 10 minutes. That you let Jimenez ride away. That the ghost of Gila Bend is back from the dead. Virginia accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her hands on the cup. Emma, I have to ask, is it true? Emma met her eyes without flinching. Every word. Virginia nodded slowly. I figured as much. Question is, what happens now? What do you mean? Virginia sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. Emma Brooks was a federal marshal. Legally speaking, she still is. That badge does not expire just because you stop wearing it. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. I retired, Virginia. Filed the papers and everything. Virginia shook her head. I checked the territorial records before I rode up here. Emma Brooks is listed as inactive, not retired. Big difference under federal law. The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. If she was still legally a marshal, then everything that happened today was official business. The killing of Frank Jimenez's men was a lawful arrest gone wrong. Her authority was intact. Virginia, I do not want that life anymore. I am done with badges and guns and hunting killers. Maybe, Virginia said quietly, but that life might not be done with you. She reached into her coat and pulled out a yellow telegraph form. This came in an hour after Thomas Ramirez started talking. It is addressed to Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks, care of Cedar Falls. Emma took the telegram with hands that trembled slightly. The message was brief and official. Marshal Brooks, stop urgent assignment, stop report. Denver immediately stop signed. Chief Marshal William Carson, stop. Emma stared at the words until they blurred. William Carson had been her supervisor 15 years ago. The man who had trained her, promoted her, and finally accepted her resignation when she married James. He wants me back, she said. Virginia nodded. Seems like it. Question is, what are you going to tell him? Emma looked around her store, seeing it through new eyes. The shelves she had stocked with care, the counter where she had made change for neighbors and strangers, the life she had built with James's love and her own determination to be someone different. But outside, snow continued falling on the ravine where 7 men lay dead. Men who had died because they threatened the wrong widow. Men who had discovered that some legends never truly die. I need time to think, Emma said finally. Virginia stood, pulling her coat tight against the cold. Time is something you might not have much of. If Carson sent for you, it means something big is happening. Something that needs Emma Brooks, not Emma Mitchell. After Virginia left, Emma sat alone in her store and tried to imagine her future. She could ignore the telegram, pretend it never arrived, continue selling coffee and sugar, and listening to mountain gossip. But word of today's shooting would spread, and with it would come others like Frank Jimenez. Men who wanted to test themselves against the legend. Or she could answer Carson's summons. Return to the life she had tried to leave behind. Pick up her badge and her guns and become the ghost of Gila Ben once more. Either choice would change everything. Emma walked to the window and looked out at the falling snow. Somewhere in the darkness, Frank Jimenez was riding hard for the territorial border, carrying word that Emma Brooks was alive. By morning, that news would reach every outlaw camp and criminal hideout from here to California. The quiet life she had built with James was over. The only question now was what would replace it. 3 days later, Emma stood on the platform of the Denver train station, a carpet bag in one hand and 15 years of memories weighing on her shoulders. She had closed the store temporarily, asking Mary Brooks, a distant cousin who lived in Cedar Falls, to watch over things until she returned. If she returned, the federal building in Denver looked exactly as she remembered it. Red brick and tall windows, with the territorial seal carved into the stone above the entrance. She climbed the steps slowly, feeling like a ghost returning to haunt her own past. The clerk at the front desk was new, a young man with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. He looked up as Emma approached, taking in her practical traveling dress and the way she carried herself. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks, reporting to Chief Marshal Carson. The clerk's eyes widened. He fumbled through papers on his desk, found the one he was looking for, and read it twice. "Yes, ma'am. The Chief Marshal is expecting you." 3rd floor, corner office. Emma climbed the familiar stairs, her footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. The building smelled of paper and tobacco and the particular mustiness of government bureaucracy. Nothing had changed. Chief Marshal William Carson looked older than she remembered, his hair gone completely gray and new lines etched around his eyes. But his handshake was still firm, and his smile was genuine. "Emma Brooks," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I was not sure you would come." "I was not sure either," Emma admitted. "Your telegram was not exactly detailed." Carson poured coffee from a silver service, the same ritual she remembered from their meetings years ago. "Some things required a certain formality," he said, "especially when asking a legend to come out of retirement." Emma accepted the coffee but did not drink. "I am not retired, apparently. Virginia Kelly made that clear." Carson nodded. "Legal technicality, but an important one. Emma, I need to ask you about what happened at your store 3 days ago." Emma told him everything, from Frank Jimenez's first visit to the final showdown in the ravine. Carson listened without interruption, making notes on a pad of paper. 7 men dead, he said when she finished. Frank Jimenez escaped. "I let him go," Emma corrected. "There is a difference." Carson set down his pen and studied her face. "Why?" "Because I am not an executioner, William. I never was. I gave him the same chance I gave them all. And if he comes back?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Then I will kill him." Carson smiled for the first time since she entered his office. "That is the Emma Brooks I remember. the one who always knew the difference between justice and murder. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the busy Denver street. Emma, I called you here because we have a situation, something that requires your particular skills. What kind of situation? Carson turned back to face her. Are you familiar with the Copper Canyon Mining Company? Emma searched her memory. Big operation out of Arizona territory, silver and copper mostly, owned by Eastern interests. That is right. What you might not know is that they have been having problems with claim jumpers and sabotage. Equipment destroyed, miners killed, or shipments hijacked. Sounds like a job for local law enforcement, Emma said. It would be, except the local sheriff is either bought off or scared off, maybe both. And the territorial governor has been getting pressure from Washington to clean things up. Copper Canyon has powerful friends in Congress. Carson returned to his desk and opened a thick file folder. 3 federal marshals have been assigned to investigate. All 3 have turned up dead. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with Denver's autumn weather. Dead how? The first one, Marshal Robert Hayes, was found in a canyon with a bullet through his head. Looked like an ambush. The second, Marshal Catherine Morse, disappeared completely. We found her horse and her gear, but no body. The third, Marshal David Chen, was killed in what appeared to be a mining accident. Except David Chen was too smart to get himself killed by accident. Emma set down her coffee cup. You think someone is specifically targeting federal marshals? I think someone is protecting a very lucrative criminal operation, and they do not care about killing federal officers to do it. Which brings me to why I need you. Carson leaned forward, his expression grave. Emma, you are the best tracker I ever worked with, the best investigator, and frankly, the most dangerous person to cross in the entire federal marshal service. If anyone can find out what happened to those 3 marshals and put a stop to this operation, it is you. Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking of her store and the peaceful life she had tried to build, thinking of James and the promise she had made to leave violence behind. But she was also thinking of 3 dead marshals who had died trying to do their jobs. People like her, who had sworn an oath to uphold the law even when it was dangerous. What exactly are you asking me to do, William? I am asking you to go to Copper Canyon, find out who killed my marshals, bring them to justice, and put an end to whatever criminal enterprise is operating out there. And if the people responsible do not want to come quietly. Carson smiled grimly. Then you do what Emma Brooks does best. You make them wish they had never heard your name. Emma spent 2 days in Denver, gathering intelligence and preparing for the assignment. The Copper Canyon Mining Company operated out of a town called Silver Ridge, deep in Arizona territory. The nearest railroad stop was Flagstaff, still a 2-day ride from the mining operation. According to the files Carson provided, Silver Ridge had grown from nothing to a town of 3,000 people in less than 5 years. The kind of boomtown that attracted prospectors and prostitutes, gamblers and gunfighters, merchants and murderers. The kind of place where federal marshals went to die. The company itself was owned by Eastern investors, but the day-to-day operations were run by a man named Jeremiah Stone, former Army colonel, veteran of the Indian Wars, and according to his record, completely ruthless in his business dealings. Emma studied Stone's photograph, memorizing the sharp features and cold eyes. This was a man who would not hesitate to kill federal officers if they threatened his operation. The question was whether he was the one giving the orders or just following them. On her last day in Denver, Emma visited a gunsmith recommended by Carson. The shop was small and cluttered, filled with the tools and smell of a craftsman's trade. The owner, an elderly German named Klaus Weber, looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. You are Marshal Brooks, he said without preamble. Chief Marshal Carson said you might be coming by. Emma nodded. I need my weapons checked and cleaned. It has been a while since I used them professionally. Weber examined her Colts with the reverence of a man who understood fine machinery. Good weapons, he said in accented English. Well maintained, but the springs are a little loose and the triggers could be smoother. He spent 3 hours working on the revolvers, adjusting mechanisms and testing the action. When he finished, the guns felt different in Emma's hands, more responsive, more deadly. These will serve you well, Weber said. But be careful, Marshal Brooks. I have heard stories about what waits in Arizona territory. What kind of stories? The kind where federal marshals ride out and never ride back. Emma holstered the Colts and paid Weber's fee. Then I guess I will have to be more careful than the others. The train to Flagstaff took 2 days, rolling through Colorado mountains and across the high desert of New Mexico territory. Emma spent the time reading reports and studying maps, learning everything she could about Silver Ridge and its surroundings. The town sat in a narrow valley surrounded by copper-rich mountains. Only one road led in or out, making it easy to control who came and went. The perfect place for a criminal operation that wanted privacy. At Flagstaff, Emma bought a horse and supplies for the journey to Silver Ridge. The livery stable owner, a weathered man named Pete Kowalski, looked concerned when she mentioned her destination. Silver Ridge, he repeated. You sure about that, ma'am? Not many folks go there by choice. What do you mean? Kowalski glanced around to make sure they were alone. Strange things happen around that mining operation. People go missing, accidents that do not look much like accidents. And the company men, they do not take kindly to strangers asking questions. Emma cinched the saddle on the bay mare she had chosen. Good thing I am not a stranger then. Ma'am, Emma showed him her badge. Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks, and I am not going to Silver Ridge to ask questions. I am going to get answers. The ride to Silver Ridge took her through some of the most beautiful and dangerous country in Arizona territory. Red rock canyons and pine forests, high meadows and deep arroyos where a man could disappear forever. Perfect country for ambushes. Emma rode carefully, using skills learned over 15 years of tracking dangerous men through hostile territory. She varied her route, avoided obvious trails, and made camp in places that could not be seen from a distance. On the second day, she found the first sign that she was being watched. Horse tracks in the dust beside the trail. Fresh tracks made within the last few hours. Someone was following her, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to keep her in sight. Emma smiled grimly. Whoever was tracking her was good, but not good enough. She had learned from Apache scouts and Comanche warriors, men who could follow a ghost through solid rock. This tracker was skilled, but he was not invisible. She led him through a maze of canyons and false trails, always staying just ahead, always keeping him guessing. By evening, she had a pretty good idea who was following her and why. As the sun set behind the mountains, Emma made camp in a small clearing surrounded by boulders. She built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and settled down as if preparing for sleep. But instead of lying down, she slipped away into the darkness, circling back toward the trail. Her tracker was camped a quarter-mile away, confident that he was hidden. Emma studied him through the scope of her Winchester, noting the professional way he had positioned his camp and the quality of his equipment. This was no ordinary outlaw or claim jumper. This was someone with military training, someone who knew how to operate in hostile territory, someone like the men who had killed 3 federal marshals. Emma could have taken him then, put a bullet through his head, and eliminated the threat. But dead men could not answer questions, and she needed information more than she needed another corpse. Instead, she settled down to wait. Tomorrow, when her tracker tried to follow her trail, he would discover that the hunted had become the hunter, and Emma Brooks would finally get some answers. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Emma had spent the night in the rocks above her tracker's camp, watching and waiting. Now, as morning light crept across the desert floor, she saw him breaking camp with the efficiency of a professional. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and bearded, wearing the kind of clothes that marked him as someone who spent his life outdoors. His horse was a good one, strong and well cared for. His rifle was a newer model Winchester, and he carried it like he knew how to use it. Emma waited until he mounted and started following her false trail before she moved. She had spent the early morning hours laying a path that would lead him exactly where she wanted him to go, into a box canyon with only one way out. The tracker followed her trail with skill, reading the signs she had left for him. Hoofprints in soft earth, broken branches where her horse had passed, disturbed stones that marked her passage. All of it carefully arranged to tell the story she wanted him to believe. By mid-morning, he was deep in the canyon, following what he thought was her route towards Silver Ridge. Emma was already in position on the rim above, rifle trained on the narrow passage below. When he reached the spot she had chosen, Emma called down to him. "That is far enough, friend. Time to have a conversation." The tracker reined in his horse and looked up, searching the rocks for her position. He was smart enough not to reach for his rifle. "You can call me Marshal Brooks," Emma continued, "and you can start by telling me who sent you to follow me." The man sat his horse calmly, hands visible on the reins. You are making a mistake, Marshal. I am not your enemy. Maybe not, Emma replied, but you have been following me for 2 days, and I do not believe in coincidences. So let us try again. Who sent you? The tracker was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. My name is Cheryl Reed. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I was hired to keep an eye on federal marshals coming into this territory. Emma kept the rifle steady. Hired by who? By people who want to make sure what happened to the last 3 marshals does not happen to you. That answer surprised Emma. She had expected him to be working for the mining company or the criminal operation she was investigating. Instead, he claimed to be trying to protect her. Come down from there slow and easy, she called. Keep your hands where I can see them. Cheryl Reed dismounted and walked his horse toward the canyon wall where Emma was positioned. She climbed down carefully, rifle never wavering from his chest. Up close, she could see that he was older than she had first thought. Maybe 50, with gray threading his dark beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in harsh country. His clothes were well-made but practical. His boots were expensive but worn. Most importantly, he moved like a man who was comfortable with violence but not eager for it. A professional. Show me some identification, Emma said. Reed reached slowly into his coat and produced a leather wallet. Inside was a Pinkerton badge and a letter of authorization signed by Alan Pinkerton himself. Emma studied the documents carefully. They looked genuine, but forgeries were not uncommon in this business. Assuming you are who you claim to be, she said, who hired Pinkerton to watch federal marshals? Reed put away his credentials. The Copper Canyon Mining Company. They claim they want to cooperate with the federal investigation, but they are concerned about the safety of any more marshals coming into the area. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. How thoughtful of them. And what exactly are your orders? To observe and report. Nothing more. If you get into trouble, I am supposed to send word to my supervisors, not intervene directly. That struck Emma as odd. In her experience, mining companies that hired Pinkertons usually wanted more direct action, protection services, or strike breaking. Simple observation was unusual. Mr. Reed, she said, I think someone is not being entirely honest with you about the nature of this assignment. Reed frowned. What do you mean? I mean that 3 federal marshals are dead, and I do not think the Copper Canyon Mining Company hired you to protect the 4th one. I think they hired you to make sure the 4th one ends up just as dead as the first 3. The possibility had clearly not occurred to Reed. His face went through several expressions as he considered the implications. Marshal Brooks, he said finally, if that is true, then I have been played for a fool. Emma lowered her rifle slightly. Mr. Reed, in my experience, honest men who realize they have been fooled that are often the best allies you can find. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Reed was quiet for a moment, staring at the canyon walls as if they held answers. When he spoke, his voice was hard with resolve. I want to find out who killed those 3 marshals, and I want to make sure they do not kill any more. Emma smiled for the first time since leaving Denver. Mr. Reed, I think we are going to get along just fine. They made camp in the canyon that night, sharing food and information. Reed had been in Arizona territory for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on the mining operation and the surrounding area. What he had learned was disturbing. The Copper Canyon Mining Company was not just extracting ore. They were also running guns to Apache raiders and selling stolen cattle to buyers in Mexico. The mining operation was a front for a criminal enterprise that stretched from Arizona to California. More importantly, the company had its own private army. Ex-soldiers and professional gunfighters who enforced the company's will with bullets and intimidation. Any local law enforcement that tried to interfere simply disappeared. That explains why the territorial governor asked for federal marshals, Emma said. Local authorities cannot handle this kind of operation. Reed nodded. But federal marshals have been dying too, which means the company has someone on the inside, someone who knows when marshals are coming and where they will be. Emma thought about that. It made sense. The 3 dead marshals had all been experienced men, not the type to walk into obvious ambushes. But if someone was feeding information to their enemies, even the best marshal could be caught off guard. Mr. Reed, she said, I think it is time we paid a visit to Silver Wedge, but we are going to do it my way. What is your way? Emma smiled grimly. We are going to give them exactly what they expect. A federal marshal riding into town to investigate the mining company. But what they are not going to expect is a Pinkerton detective who has figured out he is working for the wrong side. Reed understood immediately. You want me to maintain my cover. Keep reporting to my supervisors while actually working with you. Exactly. They trust you, which means you can get close to people I cannot. And when the time comes to spring the trap, you will be in position to help. It was a dangerous plan. If Reed was discovered, he would end up as dead as the three federal marshals. But it was also their best chance to uncover the truth and bring the criminals to justice. Reed extended his hand. Marshal Brooks, you have yourself a partner. Emma shook it. Welcome to the hunt. Mr. Reed, let us go catch some killers. Silver Ridge perched on the mountainside like a scar on the landscape. Wooden buildings climbed the slopes in terraced rows, connected by muddy streets and rickety staircases. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and the constant sound of mining operations echoed off the canyon walls. Emma rode into town at midday, making no attempt to hide her arrival. She wanted everyone to know that another federal marshal had come to Silver Ridge. Let them think she was just as naive as the others. The main street was crowded with miners heading to the saloons for lunch and whiskey. They stopped their conversations to stare at the woman riding through their town with a badge pinned to her coat and a rifle across her saddle. Emma dismounted in front of the Silver Ridge Hotel, a three-story building that served as the town's finest accommodation, which was not saying much, judging by the peeling paint and cracked windows. The desk clerk was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers and the pale complexion of someone who spent his life indoors. He looked up as Emma entered, taking in her badge and the way she carried herself. Can I help you, ma'am? Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks. I need a room for an indefinite stay. The clerk's hands trembled slightly as he turned the registration book toward her. Yes, ma'am, we have a nice room on the second floor. Overlooks the street. Emma signed the register with careful script. That will be fine. I assume you have a stable for my horse. Yes, ma'am, around back. Charlie will take good care of her. Emma paid for a week in advance, noting how the clerk's eyes widened at the sight of federal currency. Word of her arrival would be all over town within the hour. Her room was small but clean, with a single window that provided a good view of the street below. More importantly, it had a clear line of sight to the mining company's headquarters across the street. Emma unpacked her few belongings and cleaned her weapons, a ritual that helped her think. Somewhere in this town were the people responsible for killing three federal marshals. They would be watching her now, planning their next move, but they were about to discover that Emma Brooks was not like the other marshals they had killed. She was the ghost of Gila Bend, and ghosts were very hard to kill. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Emma palmed one of her Colts before answering. A young woman stood in the hallway, maybe 20 years old, with the kind of beauty that belonged in a big city rather than a mining town. Her dress was expensive, her hair perfectly arranged, and her eyes held intelligence and caution in equal measure. Marshal Brooks, she said. My name is Mary Brooks. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Emma noted the coincidence of names but did not comment on it. Of course, please come in. Mary entered the room and closed the door behind her. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to being watched and admired, but Emma sensed steel beneath the silk. Marshal, I need to tell you something important, something that might save your life. Emma gestured for her to sit in the room's single chair. I am listening. Mary perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in her lap. The three federal marshals who died here were not killed by random criminals or mining accidents. They were murdered by the same people who now know you are in town. That was not news to Emma, but she kept her expression neutral. Go on, I work for Jeremiah Stone, the man who runs the mining operation. I am what you might call his personal assistant, which means I see things and hear things that other people do not. What kind of things? Mary looked toward the window as if checking to make sure they were not being watched. Marshal, the Copper Canyon Mining Company is not what it appears to be. Yes, they mine copper and silver, but that is just a cover for other activities. What other activities? Gun running, cattle rustling, protection rackets. They have turned this entire region into their personal criminal empire, and anyone who threatens that empire ends up dead. Emma leaned against the window frame, studying Mary's face for signs of deception. Why are you telling me this? If you work for Stone, why risk warning me? Because I have seen what they do to federal marshals, Mary said quietly, and because I think you might be different from the others. Different how? Mary smiled for the first time since entering the room. Because you are Emma Brooks, the ghost of Gila Bend, the woman who tracked the Tucson gang through 100 miles of desert and brought them in alive. Emma felt a chill. How do you know that name? Mary stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. Marshall, I know that name because I used to work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency before I came to Silver Witch, before I started working for Jeremiah Stone. The pieces clicked into place in Emma's mind. You are the inside source, the one who has been feeding information to the criminals. Mary turned back to face her, and Emma saw tears in her eyes. Yes, I am the one who told them when the other marshals were coming. I am the reason they are dead. Emma kept her hand near her gun. Why? Because they threatened to kill my brother if I did not cooperate. He is being held somewhere in the mountains. I do not even know if he is still alive. Emma studied the young woman's face, reading the pain and guilt there. It could be an act, but her instincts said otherwise. Mary Brooks was telling the truth. Why warn me now? Because I cannot live with any more blood on my hands, and because I think you might be good enough to end this without getting yourself killed. Emma made a decision. Miss Brooks, if you are willing to help me, I think we can save your brother and put an end to Stone's operation, but it will be dangerous. Mary wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Marshall, I have been living with danger for months. At least this time I will be fighting back. Emma smiled. Then welcome to the team, Miss Brooks. Now tell me everything you know about Jeremiah Stone and his operation. They talked for 2 hours, Mary providing details about the criminal enterprise and its operations. By the time she left, Emma had a much clearer picture of what she was facing, and she had the beginning of a plan. That evening, Emma made her way to the Silver Dollar Saloon, the largest drinking establishment in Silver Ridge. If she wanted to make contact with Stone's people, this was the place to do it. The saloon was crowded with miners and company men, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the sound of rough conversation. Emma found a table near the back wall where she could watch the room and ordered whiskey. She did not have to wait long. Within an hour, 3 men approached her table. They moved with the confidence of men who were used to getting their way through intimidation. The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He wore a gun belt with 2 revolvers and carried himself like a professional killer. You must be the new federal marshal, he said, taking a seat across from Emma without being invited. Name is George Allen. I work for Mr. Stone. Emma sipped her whiskey. Mr. Allen, what can I do for you? Well, Marshal, Mr. Stone wanted me to extend a personal invitation. He would like to meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss your investigation. How thoughtful of him. Emma set down her glass. And if I decline his invitation? Allen smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Oh, I do not think you will decline, Marshal. Mr. Stone is a very persuasive man. I am sure he is, Emma replied. Tell Mr. Stone I will be happy to meet with him. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at his office. Allen stood, his companions flanking him. That is fine, Marshal. We will see you then. After they left, Emma finished her whiskey and made her way back to the hotel. Tomorrow she would meet the man responsible for killing 3 federal marshals. But tonight she had preparations to make. Because when Emma Brooks walked into Jeremiah Stone's office, she would not be walking in alone, and she would not be walking out without answers. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. Emma awoke before dawn, her body automatically responding to years of training and habit. Outside her window, Silver Ridge was still quiet except for the distant sound of the mining operations that never stopped. She dressed carefully, checking her weapons and making sure her badge was visible on her coat. Today she would meet Jeremiah Stone face to face. Today the real investigation would begin. At 9:30, Emma left the hotel and walked across the street to the Copper Canyon Mining Company headquarters. It was an impressive building for a frontier mining town. 3 stories of brick and timber with glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport from the railroad. The receptionist was a middle-aged woman with steel gray hair and suspicious eyes. She looked up as Emma entered, taking in the badge and the way the marshal carried herself. You must be Marshal Brooks, she said. Mr. Stone is expecting you. 3rd floor, corner office. Emma climbed the stairs slowly, noting the layout of the building and the positions of guards. Two men lounged in chairs on the second-floor landing, trying to look casual but clearly there for security. Another man stood at the top of the third-floor stairs, hand resting near his gun. Professional setup. Stone was taking no chances. The corner office was large and well-appointed, with expensive furniture and maps of the territory covering the walls. Behind a massive oak desk sat Jeremiah Stone himself. He was not what Emma had expected. Instead of the rough frontier type she had imagined, Stone was a distinguished man in his 50s, well-dressed and articulate. His gray hair was perfectly groomed, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a successful businessman. "Marshall Brooks," he said, rising to greet her. "Welcome to Silver Ridge. Please have a seat." Emma sat in the chair across from his desk, noting that it positioned her with her back to the door. An amateur mistake if Stone thought that would make her vulnerable. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Stone. I understand you have had some problems with criminal activity in the area." Stone poured coffee from a silver service, the same ritual Emma remembered from Chief Marshal Carson's office. "Indeed we have, Marshal. Claim jumpers, cattle thieves, the usual frontier lawlessness. It has been quite costly for our operation." Emma accepted the coffee but did not drink. "I understand 3 federal marshals have died investigating these problems." Stone's expression became grave. "Tragic losses, Marshal. Good men who died trying to bring law and order to a lawless region. Do you have any theories about who might be responsible?" Stone leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Marshal Brooks, this is dangerous country. There are Apache raiders in the mountains, Mexican bandits crossing the border, and outlaws of every description hiding in the canyons. Any of them could have killed your colleagues." Emma set down her coffee cup. "Mr. Stone, in my experience, federal marshals do not die from random encounters with outlaws. They die because someone specifically wants them dead." Stone's eyes hardened slightly. "What are you suggesting, Marshal?" "I am suggesting that someone in this area has a very good reason to want federal law enforcement out of the picture. Someone with a profitable criminal operation that depends on keeping the authorities away." The silence stretched between them. Stone's facade of cooperative businessman was beginning to crack, revealing something harder underneath. "Marshal Brooks," he said finally, "I hope you are not implying that my company has anything to do with the deaths of federal officers." "I am not implying anything, Mr. Stone. I am investigating, and my investigation will continue until I have answers." Stone stood and walked to the window overlooking the mining operation. Hundreds of men worked the slopes below, extracting ore from the mountain's depths. It was an impressive sight, and Emma understood why he wanted to protect it. "Marshal," he said, without turning around, "Silver Ridge is a company town. Everything here exists because of the Copper Canyon Mining Company. The beads, the businesses, the prosperity. We provide law and order because there is no one else to do it. And if federal marshals interfere with that arrangement..." Stone turned back to face her, and Emma saw the true man behind the businessman's mask. Cold, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. Then those federal marshals might find that Silver Ridge is not as hospitable as they expected. Emma stood slowly, hand drifting toward her gun. "Mr. Stone, that sounds very much like a threat." Stone smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Marshal Brooks, that was a warning. The same warning I gave to your 3 predecessors. Unfortunately, they chose not to heed it." Emma felt the familiar coldness settle in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced when Frankie Menez threatened her store, the feeling that told her violence was inevitable. "Mr. Stone," she said quietly, "I think this conversation is over." "I think you are right, Marshal. George Allen will escort you out." The door behind Emma opened, and George Allen entered with 2 other men. They moved to flank her, hands near their weapons, but not quite drawing them. Emma turned to face them, measuring distances and angles. 3 men between her and the door, Stone behind his desk with a gun probably hidden in the top drawer. Not impossible odds, but not good ones either. "Gentlemen," she said, "I can find my own way out." "I am sure you can," Allen replied, "but Mr. Stone prefers that visitors be escorted, for their own safety." Emma nodded slowly. "Of course. Safety is very important." She walked toward the door, Allen and his men falling in behind her. But instead of leaving the office, she stopped at the threshold and turned back to Stone. "Mr. Stone," she said, "I have one more question." Stone looked up from papers on his desk. "Yes, Marshal. Do you know who Emma Brooks is? Stone frowned. You are Emma Brooks, Marshal. Deputy U.S. Marshal Emma Brooks. Emma smiled, and for the first time since entering the office, it was genuine. No, Mr. Stone. Emma Brooks is the name I took when I married my husband. Before that, I was Emma Mitchell. But before that, I was someone else entirely. She could see recognition dawning in Stone's eyes. The color drained from his face as he realized what she was telling him. Before I became Emma Mitchell, and before I became Emma Brooks, I was the woman they called the Ghost of Gila Bend. The woman who tracked 27 killers through territory where other lawmen feared to go. The woman who never failed to bring in her quarry. The office was completely silent. Allen and his men had frozen in place, suddenly understanding that they were not escorting a helpless federal marshal. They were standing next to the most dangerous woman in the territory. Mr. Stone, Emma continued, you killed 3 federal marshals. You thought you could kill a 4th, but you made one mistake. You assumed Emma Brooks was just another lawman you could intimidate or murder. She turned to face Allen and his men, her hand now resting openly on her gun. Gentlemen, you have a choice. You can step aside and let me walk out of here. Or you can find out why smart men do not threaten the Ghost of Gila Bend. Allen looked at his men, then at Emma, then at Stone. The calculation was clear in his eyes. 3 against 1 should be good odds, but not against Emma Brooks. Marshal, Allen said slowly, I think we can work something out. Emma shook her head. No, Mr. Allen. The time for working things out is over. The time for justice has begun. And with that, she walked out of Jeremiah Stone's office, leaving 3 killers and a criminal mastermind to contemplate what they had brought upon themselves. The Ghost of Gila Bend was back, and this time there would be no warnings. The next 24 hours would determine whether Emma Brooks lived to see another sunrise or joined the 3 dead marshals in whatever justice awaited beyond the grave. But as she walked down the stairs of the Copper Canyon Mining Company headquarters, Emma felt the familiar calm that came before a storm. She had given Stone and his men their warning. Now came the reckoning. That evening, Emma met with Mary Brooks and Cheryl Reed in the abandoned mine shaft Reed had discovered during his surveillance. It was a perfect place for a clandestine meeting, hidden from view and with multiple escape routes if they were discovered. Mary had brought detailed maps of the mining operation in the surrounding territory. Reed had intelligence on Stone's security arrangements and the location of his private army. Together, they had enough information to plan their assault. But first, they had to rescue Mary's brother. He is being held in an old cabin about 5 miles up the mountain, Mary explained, pointing to a location on the map. Stone uses it as a private jail for people who cross him. How many guards? Emma asked. Usually 2, sometimes 3. They rotate shifts every 12 hours. Emma studied the terrain around the cabin. It was defensible but isolated, exactly the kind of place where prisoners could be held without interference. Mr. Reed, she said, how long would it take you to get word to your Pinkerton supervisors? About 6 hours by telegraph from Cedar Falls. Good. Here is what we are going to do. Emma outlined her plan. It was ambitious and dangerous, requiring perfect timing and more than a little luck. But if it worked, they would rescue Mary's brother, expose Stone's criminal operation, and bring justice to the killers of 3 federal marshals. If it failed, they would all be dead by morning. At midnight, Emma and Reed made their way up the mountain toward the cabin where Mary's brother was being held. They moved silently through the pine forest, using skills learned from years of tracking dangerous men through hostile territory. The cabin sat in a small clearing, lamplight visible through the windows. 2 guards lounged on the front porch, rifles across their knees. A 3rd man patrolled the perimeter, walking a circuit that brought him past their position every 15 minutes. Emma and Reed waited until the patrol passed, then moved closer to the cabin. Through the window, they could see a young man tied to a chair in the main room. He was alive but looked like he had been beaten. Mary's brother. The leverage Stone had used to turn a Pinkerton detective into a traitor. Emma signaled to Reed, who circled around to the back of the cabin. When she heard his signal, a soft owl call, she made her move. The first guard died without a sound, Emma's knife sliding between his ribs with professional precision. The second guard looked up just in time to see death approaching in the form of a gray-eyed woman who moved like smoke. Reed took the 3rd guard as he came around the cabin, a quick blow to the head that dropped him unconscious. Within 5 minutes, they had neutralized the guards and were cutting the ropes that bound Mary's brother. The young man, who introduced himself as Timothy Brooks, was weak but conscious. He had been held for 3 weeks, beaten regularly but kept alive as insurance against his sister's cooperation. "Can you ride?" Emma asked him. Timothy nodded. "I can manage." "Good, because we have a long night ahead of us." They made their way back down the mountain, Timothy riding double with Reed while Emma scouted ahead. By dawn, they had reached the telegraph office in Cedar Falls, where Reed sent a carefully worded message to his Pinkerton supervisors. The message was designed to look like a routine report, but it contained coded information that would bring federal marshals and territorial authorities to Silver Ridge within 24 hours. More importantly, it would expose Stone's operation to his eastern investors, who would not appreciate learning that their mining company was actually a criminal enterprise. But Emma was not planning to wait for reinforcements. By the time help arrived, Stone and his men would be gone, disappeared into the vast territory where they could continue their criminal activities. No, this ended today. That afternoon, Emma Brooks walked back into Silver Ridge alone. She had left Reed and the Brooks siblings in Cedar Falls with instructions to bring the cavalry if she was not back by sunset. But she did not plan to need rescue. She was the ghost of Gila Bend, and ghosts finished what they started. The town seemed different now, charged with tension like the air before a thunderstorm. Word of her confrontation with Stone had spread, and people watched her with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They knew violence was coming. They could feel it in the wind. Emma walked directly to the Silver Dollar Saloon, where she knew Stone's men would be waiting. She pushed through the bat-wing doors and stepped inside, hand resting casually on her gun. The saloon fell silent. 20 men looked up from their drinks and card games, all of them armed, all of them working for Jeremiah Stone. In the back corner, George Allen sat with his lieutenants, watching her with eyes like winter ice. Emma walked to the bar and ordered whiskey. The bartender, a nervous man with shaking hands, poured the drink and stepped back. "Gentlemen," Emma said, raising her glass in a mock toast, "I have a message from the federal government." She threw back the whiskey and set the glass on the bar with a sharp crack. "Jeremiah Stone and his criminal organization are under arrest. Any man who stands with him will be considered an accessory to murder and will be treated accordingly." Allen stood slowly, his men rising with him. "Marshal Brooks, you are outnumbered 20-1. Even the ghost of Gila Bend cannot beat those odds." Emma smiled. "Mr. Allen, you are about to learn something important about legends. They do not die easily." The first shot came from Allen, a quick draw that would have killed most opponents. But Emma was not most opponents. She was already moving, the Colt appearing in her hand like magic, spitting fire and death. Allen's shot went wide. Emma's did not. The saloon erupted in gunfire and chaos. Men dove for cover behind overturned tables in the bar. Emma moved through the smoke and confusion like a ghost, her gun speaking with deadly precision. She had learned long ago that in a gunfight, accuracy mattered more than speed. Every shot had to count. Every bullet had to find its mark. There was no room for error when facing superior numbers. By the time the smoke cleared, 7 men lay dead on the saloon floor. The survivors had fled into the street, carrying word of what they had witnessed to Jeremiah Stone. Emma reloaded her weapons and walked outside. The final confrontation was waiting. Stone stood in the middle of the street with his remaining men, perhaps a dozen gunfighters who had decided their pay was worth facing the ghost of Gila Bend. Behind them, the townspeople watched from windows and doorways, witnesses to the end of an era. "Marshal Brooks," Stone called out, "you have caused me considerable inconvenience." Emma walked toward them, boots echoing on the wooden street. "Mr. Stone, you have murdered 3 federal officers. The inconvenience is just beginning." Stone drew his gun with the smooth motion of a professional. His men followed suit, a dozen weapons trained on the lone woman walking toward them. But Emma Brooks was no longer alone. From the buildings around the street, rifle barrels appeared. Reed had returned with reinforcements. Federal marshals and territorial authorities had arrived just in time for the final act. The battle was brief and decisive. Caught in a crossfire, Stone's men fell quickly. The criminal empire that had terrorized the territory for years died in a hail of bullets and justice. When the shooting stopped, Jeremiah Stone lay dead in the dust of Silver Ridge's main street. The ghost of Gila Bend stood over his body, smoking Colts in her hands. Justice finally served. As the sun set behind the mountains, Emma Brooks walked back to her hotel. Tomorrow she would return to her store, to the quiet life she had built with James's love. But tonight she was content knowing that 3 dead marshals could finally rest in peace. The legend of Emma Brooks would live forever. But the woman herself was ready to go home.